A boyfriend is humiliated by his girlfriend in front of everyone because of the gift he bought her, but years later she gets a surprise. Jimmy skillfully maneuvered through the crowd, each step loaded with a firm and determined purpose. The air was saturated with the buzz of passers-by and the sharp sound of cars, but his mind was focused on only one thing, the mission of love and sacrifice he had meticulously planned. For months, Jimmy had saved every penny he could, working late at the small auto repair shop where he fixed cars older than most of his customers. All of this was to buy the gift Ariana wanted. Ariana, with her long blonde hair that shone in the sun like strands of gold, had the kind of beauty that stopped traffic and impeccable taste, which often came with high and sometimes ruthless expectations. The week before, as they walked through the park beneath the autumn trees that had already shed their leaves, she had been very clear about what she wanted for her birthday. "Jimmy, you know I don't settle for less," Ariana had said, her blue eyes fixed on his, a slight disdainful curve to her lips. "This year I expect something that really shows your love. Maybe that Chanel handbag in the window on Madison? You saw it, didn't you?" Jimmy had seen it, of course. The handbag, a splendid leather piece with its emblematic interlocking logo, hung elegantly in a lit window, almost like an unattainable trophy. "Yes, I saw it," he replied, trying to hide the nervousness he felt about the price he knew was astronomical. "I'll do my best, Ari." The response had been a superficial nod, as if to Ariana. Jimmy's dedication to fulfilling his promise was an inevitability, not a gesture of devotion. He knew she valued the material as much as the emotional, perhaps even more. Now as he walked through the streets, Jimmy passed the same luxury boutique that housed the handbag. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open, feeling the air conditioning hit his face, a welcome change from the stifling heat outside. The store was a realm of opulence, with handbags, shoes, and accessories meticulously arranged on shelves and glass displays. The saleswoman, an elegant woman in a Chanel suit, approached him with a professional smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone indicating a mix of curiosity and caution, perhaps due to Jimmy's simple appearance in contrast to the luxury around him. "Yes, I'm interested in a Chanel handbag. The one in the window, please," Jimmy said, his voice steady despite the anxiety he felt. "Of course, just a moment." She turned, her heels clicking on the marble floor as she walked to the display. Jimmy watched as she carefully removed the handbag, bringing it over as if it were a sacred relic. Once he had it in his hands, he couldn't help but admire the craftsmanship, the softness of the leather, the subtle shine of the hardware. It was perfect, and he knew Ariana would love it. "It's beautiful," he murmured, more to himself than to the saleswoman. "It's one of our most desired pieces," she replied, handing him the handbag. "Will you be taking it?" Jimmy nodded, swallowing hard at the thought of his bank account balance. "Yes, I'll take it." Once the transaction was completed and the handbag was carefully packed in a designer bag, Jimmy left the store. He felt a mix of triumph and terror. Triumph for having obtained the gift Ariana wanted, and terror knowing that financially, that purchase would leave him in a precarious situation. After making his decision, Jimmy pushed open the glass door of the upscale boutique, entering a world that seemed to orbit in a different sphere from his usual reality. The air was infused with the intoxicating aroma of expensive leather and subtle perfumes that floated like invisible clouds, carrying promises of luxury and exclusivity. Every detail of the store's interior was meticulously designed to enchant and seduce, from the soft lights illuminating the products to the ambient music playing quietly, creating an almost sacred environment for luxury shopping. A saleswoman, noticing Jimmy's entrance, approached him with an elegant and measured smile. Impeccably dressed in a black tailored suit that exuded authority and sophistication, she emanated the confidence of someone who knew every inch of that boutique. "Good afternoon, sir," she greeted with a voice that blended warmth and a touch of curiosity. "Is there anything specific I can help you with today?" Jimmy, still adjusting to the refined environment, responded with a nervous nod. "I'm looking for a handbag, a Chanel I saw in the window last week." "Oh, of course," she replied, her smile broadening slightly. "Chanel is always an exceptional choice. Let's go to the display." As they walked, Jimmy noticed the discreet glances from other customers and staff. It was clear that his presence there was an anomaly, his simple and practical attire contrasting sharply with the surroundings. However, driven by the image of Ariana's smile, he remained determined. The saleswoman stopped in front of the display case housing the desired handbag. With graceful movements, she removed the handbag and handed it to Jimmy. "Here it is, sir. One of our most popular models this season." Jimmy took the handbag carefully, almost reverently. The leather was soft and luxurious to the touch, the color an elegant beige that caught the light charmingly. The Chanel logo, prominently displayed, gleamed under the boutique's lights. He opened the handbag, noting the spacious interior and multiple compartments, perfect for someone as organized and detail-oriented as Ariana. "It's really beautiful," Jimmy murmured, more to himself than to the saleswoman. "It certainly is," the saleswoman agreed, watching him closely. "Are you thinking of gifting it to someone special?" "Yes, it's for my girlfriend's birthday. She specifically mentioned this handbag," Jimmy explained, feeling the weight of expectation. "Then she has excellent taste," the saleswoman remarked with an approving nod. "Shall we proceed with the purchase?" The moment of truth had arrived. The price, discreetly revealed by the saleswoman, made Jimmy's heart skip a beat. It was an amount that represented many extra hours, many frugal lunches, many personal sacrifices. Yet the thought of Ariana's radiant smile when she received the handbag strengthened his resolve. "Yes, let's do it," he said, handing over his credit card. As the saleswoman processed the transaction, Jimmy felt a mixture of emotions. The anxiety of seeing his bank balance significantly decrease clashed with the satisfaction of knowing Ariana would be delighted. When the saleswoman handed him the elegantly packaged handbag, he knew that, regardless of the cost, the joy it would bring, Ariana was worth every penny. With the Chanel handbag now in hand, Jimmy left the boutique, the glass door closing silently behind him. He was one step closer to completing his mission, completely unaware of the twist that fate still had in store for him. As he walked away, the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, almost as a prelude to the shadows that would soon fall over his journey. With the Chanel handbag elegantly packaged in his hands, Jimmy left the luxury boutique, his heart still racing both from the purchase he had just made and from the anticipation of seeing Ariana's face light up with joy. However, as he descended the stairs of the luxurious establishment, something more than the cold night breeze caught his attention. On the opposite sidewalk, under the flickering glow of a street lamp, a young woman dressed in a simple jacket and faded jeans was walking quickly, casting nervous glances over her shoulder. Following her, at a threatening distance, was a group of 3 men. Their postures were intimidating, and even from afar, Jimmy could sense the tension emanating from the group. Intrigued and concerned, Jimmy hesitated for a moment, observing. The woman seemed visibly distressed, and with every step the men took closer, her anxiety seemed to increase. Something inside him, perhaps the same impulse that had led him to spend a substantial amount on the handbag to please Ariana, moved him not to ignore the scene. Crossing the street, Jimmy maintained a safe distance. He took his cell phone out of his pocket, ready to call the police at the first sign of confrontation. As he followed, he tried to keep the handbag under his arm, protecting it unconsciously. "Hey, are you okay?" Jimmy finally called to the woman when he noticed that the men had quickened their pace, closing the distance between them and the young woman. She turned abruptly, surprised to be approached. Her face, illuminated by the dim light, was marked by fear. I don't know. These guys have been following me for a while," she said, her voice trembling. "Let's go to that cafe. There are more people there." "I'll call the police," Jimmy suggested, indicating a well-lit establishment a few meters away. Without waiting for a response, he lightly touched her arm, guiding her toward the safer place. The men, realizing Jimmy's intervention, hesitated. They exchanged glances with each other, clearly not expecting anyone to interfere. "Mind your own business, man," one of them growled as Jimmy and the woman walked past them, quickening their pace. "It's my business now," Jimmy replied without looking back, his voice more firm than he felt. Upon reaching the cafe, he opened the door for the woman and glanced around, noting the presence of other people as additional security. Inside the cafe, Jimmy took out his cell phone and dialed 911, explaining the situation in a few words. While he spoke with the operator, the woman sat at a table near the window, still trembling. "Thank you for helping," she murmured when Jimmy hung up the phone. "It was nothing. You're safe here. The police will arrive soon. Can you tell me what happened?" Jimmy asked, sitting across from her, Ariana's handbag now resting beside him on the chair. She sighed, trying to calm herself. "I don't know exactly. I was on my way home from work when I noticed those guys were following me. I was afraid to go straight home." "You did the right thing," Jimmy affirmed, trying to offer some comfort while his eyes still scanned the surroundings, alert. A few minutes later, the distant siren of the police could be heard approaching, and Jimmy felt a wave of relief. However, he could not have predicted that this night would be just the beginning of a series of events that would intertwine the fates of Jimmy and the woman he had just saved in a way neither of them could have imagined. The cold night had deepened, and the city lights flickered like distant sentinels as Jimmy and the woman he had just saved, Natalie, waited inside the cafe, the soft murmur of conversations and the clinking of cups around them creating a surreal counterpoint to the tension they still felt. The distant sound of a growing siren signaled that help was on the way, but the relief it should have brought was abruptly cut off. A sharp scream tore through the tranquility of the night, and both turned their heads toward the window, just in time to see the three men they thought they had avoided running toward them. The expression on the men's faces was one of untamed fury, and before Jimmy or Natalie could react, the cafe door was violently pushed open. The surrounding customers stood up, alarmed by the sudden chaos. The three men, moving with blood-chilling aggression, advanced directly toward Jimmy and Natalie. "Thought you could shake us off, girl?" growled the leader of the trio, a tall man in a worn leather jacket, grabbing Natalie's arm with brute force. Before she could respond, he snatched her bag from her hand, scattering her belongings on the floor. Jimmy reacted instinctively, jumping up with urgency. "Leave her alone," he demanded, his voice loaded with forced courage. The second man, shorter but with an equally dangerous look, turned to Jimmy. "And what are you going to do about it?" he challenged before noticing the Chanel handbag next to him. With a malicious grin, he picked it up. "This must be worth something, huh?" Desperate, Jimmy tried to grab the handbag back, but the third man intervened, pushing him back with surprising strength. Jimmy fell against a table, knocking over cups and plates with a deafening crash. As the customers screamed and backed away, the men quickly gathered what they could and, without wasting another second, ran out of the cafe, disappearing into the city's darkness. Jimmy, still dazed on the floor, tried to make sense of what had just happened. Natalie, pale and trembling, ran to him, helping him up. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. I think so," Jimmy mumbled, running his hand through his hair and trying to gather his dignity from the floor along with his scattered belongings. The police arrived minutes later, but the robbers had already vanished into the urban shadows, taking with them not just the Chanel handbag, but a piece of the security Jimmy felt. As he recounted the incident to the officers, his mind was elsewhere, reflecting on the bitter irony of losing so much in an attempt to do good. Natalie stayed by his side, offering silent support. The night, which had begun with an act of kindness, had plunged into a whirlwind of violence and loss. As the cafe began to calm down and the customers resumed their hushed whispers, Jimmy felt the weight of the night pressing down on him. The police officers finished their notes and promised to do what they could to track down the criminals, but the words sounded hollow in the charged air. With a tired sigh, Jimmy looked at Natalie, his eyes meeting hers in a silent sharing of despondency and resilience. As the two left the cafe, an unwanted new chapter in their lives was just beginning, full of uncertainties and shadows, but also, perhaps, a chance for new beginnings. After the turmoil and terror of the robbery, Jimmy and Natalie found refuge in a quieter corner of the cafe, away from the curious looks of other customers who gradually resumed their whispered conversations. The air still vibrated with the residual tension of the incident, but now the adrenaline was beginning to give way to the fatigue and reality of what had happened. Natalie, still trembling, wiped away the tears that stubbornly ran down her young and expressive face. Jimmy, beside her, felt responsible in some way for offering some comfort. He gently pulled a couple of chairs together, gesturing for them to sit a little away from the cafe's central hustle. "My name is Natalie," she began, trying to smile through her tears, an attempt to cut through the gravity of the moment. "Sorry for all this chaos. I really didn't expect the night to end like this." Jimmy offered a gentle smile, trying to reassure her. "You don't have to apologize, Natalie. I'm just glad you're safe now. It was quite a scare for both of us." They then talked about what had happened, sharing details with the police who arrived shortly after to take their statements. The officers, serious and professional, noted every word attentively, while Jimmy and Natalie tried to reconstruct every moment of the robbery. "They came so suddenly," Natalie explained, her voice faltering a little. "I was just trying to get home after work. I'm a student during the day and work in a restaurant at night." "I guess it was my fault," Jimmy interrupted, the weight of guilt doubling his shoulders. "I should have realized earlier that they were a threat." "No, you helped me," Natalie quickly responded, placing her hand on his in a gesture of gratitude. "If it wasn't for you, I don't know what would have happened." After the police left, promising to stay in touch if they found the culprits, Jimmy and Natalie settled back into their chairs, the silence between them less tense now. Natalie, grateful and a little calmer, began to talk more about herself. "I live here in the city with my grandmother. My parents died when I was younger, so she raised me. I'm in my second year of college, studying to be a nurse." Jimmy listened attentively, impressed by the resilience of the young woman in front of him. "That's incredible, Natalie. Really admirable, you know?" She smiled, a little more upbeat. "Thank you. And you, Jimmy, what do you do for a living?" "I work in a mechanic shop," he replied. "Nothing as noble as saving lives, but I fix things. I suppose there's some poetry in that too." They both laughed, and for a moment the weight of the night seemed a little lighter. They continued talking, sharing stories about their lives, finding common ground in their experiences, and sharing laughs that served as a balm for the hectic night. As the cafe began to close and the last customers left, Jimmy realized he didn't want the conversation to end. He looked at Natalie, who seemed to share the same feeling. "Would you like to have coffee another day?" he asked, hopeful. Natalie smiled, her expression brightening. "I'd love to." With Natalie's phone number now saved in his cell phone and a promise of a new meeting, Jimmy felt that, despite everything, the night had brought something good. They said goodbye at the cafe door, and as Jimmy walked home, he couldn't help but feel that something significant had begun. Something that, he hoped, could be the start of a beautiful friendship, or perhaps something more. After all, it wasn't every day that such a terrible night ended with a new connection. As Jimmy walked away, lost in thoughts about the future, he could barely imagine the twists his life was about to take. The night had been long and full of trials, but somehow, he felt he was just at the beginning of a much larger journey. The soft evening light bathed the opulent mansion where Ariana would celebrate her birthday. Impeccably manicured gardens surrounded the property, and inside, the decor was palpably luxurious, with exotic flowers adorning each table and crystal chandeliers casting prisms of light throughout the spacious rooms. The city's elite were beginning to gather, dressed in their finest clothes, while classical background music gently filled the air with an atmosphere of understated festivity. Jimmy, still shaken by the events of the previous night, had spent the morning between phone calls to the police and futile attempts to find a solution for the lost gift. Now, as he approached the main entrance of the party, his heart was racing, not with excitement, but with growing nervousness. Upon entering, Jimmy searched for Ariana, finally finding her surrounded by a group of admirers. She looked stunning, dressed in an elegant silk gown that reflected the soft glow of the ballroom lights. With a sigh, he approached, trying to remain calm. "Ariana," he began, lightly touching her arm to get her attention. She turned with a smile that quickly faded upon seeing Jimmy without a gift in hand. "Jimmy, where's my purse? The party has already started," she said, her voice tinged with impatient expectation. Jimmy swallowed hard, the words sticking in his throat. "Ariana, I need to explain what happened last night. I was robbed and They took the purse I bought for you." Ariana's expression instantly shifted to a mix of disbelief and irritation. "Robbed? Really, Jimmy? Is that the best excuse you could come up with?" Her voice rose in volume, attracting the attention of the people nearby. "It's not an excuse, Ariana. Jimmy struggled to find the right words, but the skeptical look on her face and the curious glances of the guests around them only heightened his anxiety. "You know, I should have figured. You've always been a bit, well, poor, and now you come up with this ridiculous story," Ariana continued, her voice full of disdain. "You promised you'd keep your word. I see it was a mistake to trust you." Jimmy felt each word like a blow. "Ariana, I'm not lying. I can show you the police report. Enough, Jimmy!" Ariana interrupted him, gesturing for him to move away. "I don't want to hear any more. Please leave my party. I don't want you ruining my birthday with your stories." Desolate and feeling everyone's eyes on him, Jimmy retreated. There was nothing he could say to change the situation. With his head down, he crossed the ballroom, each step resonating like an echo of his humiliation, leaving the party under the murmurs and disapproving looks of the other guests. As he walked away from the mansion, the cool night air did little to ease the burning of his shame. In his car, before starting the engine, he allowed himself a moment to breathe, trying to recover from the emotional blow. However, as he drove back home, a resolution began to form in his mind. He knew he had to do something, not just to prove his honesty, but to regain his own sense of worth. The night of the party was ending for Jimmy, but the gears of a greater change were beginning to turn. As he left the illuminated mansion behind, the stage was set for a revelation that could change everything. In the solitude of his small apartment, the walls seemed to absorb the echo of the humiliation Jimmy had suffered. Sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open in front of him, he tried to drown his sorrows in the blue light of the screen. Surfing the internet was an attempt to forget, even if momentarily, the fiasco at Ariana's birthday party. The night was quiet, only occasionally broken by the sound of a passing car or the distant bark of a dog. Jimmy logged into his social media, not to interact, but to observe from afar the world that seemed to have turned against him. That's when he saw Ariana's new post. The image showed Ariana, as radiant as ever, next to a man who exuded wealth, from the expensive watch on his wrist to the confident smile that complemented Ariana's. The setting was a luxurious restaurant, and the caption left no doubt about the nature of the relationship: unforgettable nights with someone special. The likes and admiring comments quickly appeared, each one like a stab to Jimmy's already wounded heart. His breathing became heavy, a mix of sadness and relief coursing through his body. Sadness for the lost love and relief for finally seeing the true face of the woman he thought he loved. "She never loved me," he murmured to himself, the realization bitter but liberating. It was in this moment of vulnerability that his phone vibrated. It was a message from Natalie. "Hey Jimmy, just wanted to see how you're doing. After everything that happened," the screen read, the simple words bringing unexpected comfort. He hesitated for a moment before replying. Typing slowly, he told her about the disaster at the party and how he felt deceived. Natalie was quick to offer words of support. "You deserve someone who sees your true worth, Jimmy. Someone who loves who you are, not what you can give." Natalie's words were like a balm, and a flowing conversation followed. Through text messages, they shared thoughts, laughter, and even confessions. The digital dialogue seemed to weave a connection that Jimmy hadn't felt in a long time, a connection based on genuineness and mutual understanding. As the night wore on, Jimmy felt increasingly lighter. The conversation with Natalie provided him with a new perspective, and a friendship was blossoming, one that promised something deeper and more meaningful than he had experienced with Ariana. They decided to meet again and arranged to have coffee the next day. As he closed the laptop and prepared for bed, Jimmy felt invigorated. After all, perhaps the end of something wasn't the end of everything. Maybe it was just the beginning of something truly special. As he settled into bed, the weight of the past few days seemed less oppressive. He fell asleep thinking about meeting Natalie, with a sense of anticipation and a hint of hope. The sun was already high in the sky when Jimmy's phone vibrated on his kitchen table, interrupting the morning silence. It was an unexpected call from the local police station. The detective's voice on the other end of the line was firm and brought surprising news. "Mr. Lawson, I'd like to inform you that we have apprehended the individuals involved in the robbery you reported. We managed to recover several stolen items, including a Chanel handbag. Could you come to the station to identify your belongings and complete the process?" Jimmy could hardly believe what he was hearing. The possibility of recovering the gift he had bought for Ariana, the one that had caused so much distress, seemed like a small miracle. "Yes, of course, I'll be there as soon as possible," he replied, his voice still trembling with surprise. Arriving at the police station, Jimmy was led to a room where various recovered items were laid out on a table. There was the Chanel handbag, almost unreal in its physical presence after everything that had happened. As he confirmed that the handbag was indeed his, a familiar figure entered the room. It was Natalie, accompanied by an officer. She looked at Jimmy with a shy and relieved smile. "Looks like we both got lucky today," she said, approaching the table to also identify some of her belongings that had been stolen. "Yes, it's an unexpected surprise, but very welcome," Jimmy replied, returning the smile. As they spoke with the detective about the next legal steps and thanked the police for their efforts, the bond that had begun in a moment of crisis seemed to strengthen even more. With all the forms filled out and belongings claimed, Jimmy and Natalie left the station together. Outside, the fresh morning air felt especially sweet. "What are you going to do with the handbag now?" Natalie asked curiously as they walked slowly down the sidewalk. Jimmy looked at the Chanel handbag, now in his hands again. "I thought about returning it to the store, but now I don't know. It seems burdened with so many bad memories," he confessed. "You could turn a bad memory into a good deed," suggested Natalie, a spark of an idea shining in her eyes. "Maybe donate it to charity, or use it to raise funds for a good cause." Jimmy considered this, admiring Natalie's perspective. "That's a great idea. Turning something negative into something positive. I like that." They stopped at a nearby cafe, deciding to sit down for a coffee while planning what they could do with the handbag. The conversation flowed naturally, between laughter and planning, the morning stretching before them full of possibilities. As the coffee reached their hands and the conversation deepened, the idea of doing something meaningful with the Chanel handbag began to take shape. Together, Jimmy and Natalie were not just planning a future, they were creating a new beginning. The connection between Jimmy and Natalie grew every day, nurtured by deep conversations and a mutual understanding that seemed to defy the short time they had known each other. Motivated by this new bond, Jimmy took the initiative to invite Natalie to dinner, something that would officially mark the beginning of a friendship that he suspected could turn into something more. With a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a mix of nerves and anticipation bubbling inside him, Jimmy drove to the address Natalie had given him, imagining a modest apartment or a small house, something that reflected the simplicity with which she presented herself. However, as he turned the last corner, his heart nearly stopped. In front of him stood an imposing mansion, with majestic columns and gardens stretching like well-tended green fields under the twilight glow. The residence exuded a subtle elegance, with lights softly illuminating through large windows, revealing glimpses of an equally stunning interior. For a moment, Jimmy stood at the gate, doubting if he had noted the address correctly. His doubts only dissipated when Natalie appeared at the door, a warm smile lighting up her face upon seeing him. "Jimmy, you came," she exclaimed, descending the marble steps to greet him. "I hope you didn't have trouble finding the place." I didn't expect it to be so impressive," Jimmy managed to say, handing her the flowers, which suddenly seemed inadequate in the face of such opulence. Natalie laughed, a light laugh that eased Jimmy's embarrassment. "Come, I want you to meet my parents," she said, guiding him into the mansion. The interior of the house was as splendid as the exterior. Tasteful art adorned the walls, and elegant furniture decorated every room they passed through. Natalie led Jimmy to the living room where her parents were waiting. Natalie's mother, a woman of elegant bearing and welcoming eyes, rose from her seat upon seeing them. "You must be the Jimmy we've heard so much about," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Marina, and this is my husband, Ricardo." Ricardo, a man of robust stature with a kind smile, shook Jimmy's hand firmly. "Natalie told us how you helped her. We are very grateful for your courage and kindness." Jimmy, a bit overwhelmed by the situation but touched by the warm reception, replied, "It was the right thing to do. I'm just glad I could help." They talked more about the incident, with Jimmy sharing details of what happened and how, coincidentally, both ended up benefiting from the misfortune thanks to the capture of the thieves. Marina and Ricardo listened attentively, occasionally nodding or asking questions that showed a genuine concern for their daughter's well-being and a growing respect for Jimmy. As the evening progressed, dinner was served at a large dining table, and the conversation flowed freely. Jimmy felt increasingly part of the family, with each shared laugh and exchanged story strengthening the bonds that were forming. At the end of the night, as they said their goodbyes, Natalie accompanied Jimmy to the door. "Thank you for today," she said. "It meant a lot to me and to my parents." "It did for me too," Jimmy replied, his heart light. "Today was really special." They exchanged a look that promised more meetings like this one, more shared moments. As Jimmy made his way back to his car, he knew that the unexpected night at an unlikely mansion was just the beginning of something new and exciting. After the initial meeting at Natalie's opulent mansion, Jimmy was determined to show her a different side of life, one that valued genuine moments more than material opulence. With this in mind, he chose a small local restaurant known for its cozy atmosphere and delicious homemade food, a striking contrast to the luxurious environment to which Natalie was accustomed. On the agreed night, Jimmy arrived at Natalie's house with a shy smile and a bouquet of wild daisies in his hands. Natalie greeted him at the door, wearing a simple yet elegant dress that perfectly complemented her natural beauty. "These are for you," Jimmy said, handing her the flowers. "They're simple, but I thought you'd like them." Natalie accepted the flowers with a radiant smile. "I love daisies, Jimmy. They're sincere. They don't need showiness to be beautiful. Thank you." They drove to the restaurant, a small and cozy establishment, with exposed brick and soft lighting creating a welcoming environment. As they entered, they were greeted by the inviting aroma of herbs and freshly baked bread. The owner, an elderly gentleman with a warm smile, greeted them warmly and led them to a reserved table in the corner, offering privacy and a charming view of the small garden lit by lanterns. "This place is wonderful, Jimmy," Natalie commented as she looked around, clearly impressed with the choice. "There's a warmth here that no amount of money can buy." "They make the best lasagna in town," Jimmy revealed, excited to share one of his favorite places with her. "I hope you like homemade food." "I love it," Natalie replied with genuine enthusiasm. "It's always more about who shares the table with you, isn't it?" During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams and challenges, discovering more similarities in their perspectives on life. Between laughter and stories, Jimmy felt a connection that went beyond the surface, a bond that seemed to deepen with every minute they spent together. "I think the best things in life are the simplest," Natalie said as they shared a homemade apple pie dessert. "Like tonight, for example. Good food, good company, and honest conversation." "I completely agree," Jimmy responded, his eyes meeting hers in a moment of mutual understanding. It's easy to forget what truly matters when the world around us is so focused on the material. At the end of the night, as they walked back to the car, a feeling of contentment and simplicity enveloped them. They said goodbye with a warm hug, promising to repeat the evening soon. Jimmy returned home with the certainty that the night had been a success, not because of grand gestures or extravagant expenses, but because of the authenticity and true connection they shared. The night was clear, and the fresh spring air carried the scent of newly blossomed flowers as Jimmy and Natalie walked out of the restaurant, wrapped in laughter and light conversation. Despite the modest restaurant, the date had been full of meaningful moments and deep connections that made Jimmy feel closer to Natalie than he ever imagined possible. As they approached Jimmy's car, a powerful engine roar cut through the quiet night. A shiny red sports car pulled up abruptly next to them. The window rolled down, revealing Ariana and a man Jimmy assumed to be her new boyfriend. Ariana wore a mocking smile, clearly intended to intimidate. "Well, look who it is," Jimmy trying to impress out of his league. Didn't expect to see you in such a humble place, Ariana taunted, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she sized Natalie up and down. The man behind the wheel laughed, a derisive sound that echoed with the arrogance of someone used to looking down on others. Yeah, it looks like you're having a great time with cheap plates. Why not invest in something that really impresses, man? Jimmy felt a wave of frustration, but before he could respond, Natalie held his hand, conveying calm with a gentle squeeze. It's not worth it, Jimmy, she murmured, her tone low but firm. They know nothing about what really matters. Turning to Ariana with a serene smile that contrasted with the tension of the moment, Natalie spoke. Ariana, I hope you find as much joy in your choices as we found in ours tonight. Good night. Ariana, taken aback by the serene and hostility-free response, was at a loss for words for a moment. The forced smile disappeared from her face as she struggled to formulate a response. Finally, the man behind the wheel revved the engine, leaving behind only the sound of tires against the asphalt and a cloud of wounded pride. Jimmy and Natalie continued their way to his car, the silence between them filled with mutual understanding. Thank you, Natalie, Jimmy said after a moment, his voice laden with gratitude, for standing by me, even when things get complicated. Standing by you is easy, Jimmy, Natalie replied, her smile lighting up the darkness. And remember, it's not others' opinions that define our worth. Comforted by Natalie's words, Jimmy felt his respect and admiration for her grow even more. They got into the car, leaving behind the unpleasant episode, but taking with them a valuable lesson about resilience and true happiness. As they drove back, the conversation flowed naturally, each laugh and exchange strengthening the bond that already seemed strong. The night could have ended with the displeasure caused by the encounter with Ariana, but instead, they found new depth in their growing friendship. And as the city passed by them, illuminated only by streetlights and the stars above, they both knew they were ready to face whatever the future brought together. The months that followed were a period of intense transformation and growth for Jimmy. With Natalie always by his side, offering unconditional emotional support, and the wise advice of her father, who became an unexpected mentor, Jimmy began to redefine the contours of his professional and personal life. Jimmy's auto repair shop, once a small, nearly forgotten spot in the city, began to gain a reputation. The modest space, steeped in the smell of oil and metal, transformed into a place where quality and trust were the true currencies. Jimmy invested in new equipment, updated his techniques, and expanded the services offered. His father, a retired engineer, brought a wealth of technical knowledge and management tips that were crucial to the business's development. One afternoon, as Jimmy and his father worked on an old engine, Natalie brought coffee and sandwiches for the team, a common practice she adopted to show her support. As they took a break, Jimmy's father began discussing business strategies. Jimmy, have you thought about digitalizing more of your services? Maybe developing an online booking system or investing in digital marketing? He suggested, handing Jimmy a cup of coffee. Jimmy considered the idea, initially skeptical but interested. I don't know much about these things, Dad. Do you really think it could help? Absolutely, his father replied confidently. Natalie, you're more in tune with this internet stuff. What do you think? Natalie smiled, excited. I think it's a great idea. I can help set up social media and maybe create a website for the shop. Nowadays, an online presence can make all the difference. Encouraged by their enthusiasm, Jimmy agreed to explore new digital frontiers for his business. In the following months, with Natalie's help, the shop gained a functional website and social media profiles, attracting a broader and more diverse clientele. Positive reviews and recommendations began to pile up, and Jimmy's small shop became a local example of success and innovation. On a particularly busy day, as Jimmy supervised work at the shop, Natalie approached him with a smile he had grown to adore. Have you seen the latest online reviews? People really love the service here. You made this happen, Jimmy. Jimmy looked around, his heart filling with pride for what he had built. Not just a thriving business, but a place where hard work and honesty defined the value of everything they did. We did this, Natalie. With your help and my dad's. Jimmy paused, emotional. I never thought I'd achieve something like this. Natalie took his hand, intertwining their fingers. I always knew you could. You're amazing, Jimmy. As the day came to a close, the couple decided to celebrate the shop's continued success with a quiet dinner. As they closed the shop and walked to the car, they knew they were not just building a business, but also a future together. As they drove to the restaurant, talking about plans and dreams, they were unaware of the twists that fate still had in store for them, ready to test the strength of the bond they had formed. And as the city passed by, illuminated by the last rays of the day's sun, they were ready to face whatever came next, together. The fall holiday brought with it perfect weather for a getaway, and Jimmy and Natalie, eager for some relaxation and adventure, decided to take a trip along the picturesque coastal route that bordered the city. The car was packed with snacks, and a carefully curated playlist played, creating a melodic background that blended with their laughter and lively conversations. "I'm so glad we decided to do this," Natalie said, the wind playing with her hair as she rolled down the window. "It's a much-needed break, don't you think?" "Definitely," Jimmy agreed, looking at her with a smile. "Nothing like the open road, good music, and the best company to recharge our energy." As they drove on, the scenery changed, with the shimmering blue ocean accompanying them in the distance and golden hills unfolding under the evening sun. Everything seemed perfect, an idyllic picture of peace and happiness. However, the tranquility was abruptly interrupted by an alarming honking sound. A vehicle coming from the opposite direction, apparently out of control, crossed the median. The driver, struggling to regain control, ended up veering into Jimmy's lane. With quick reflexes, Jimmy tried to swerve, but there wasn't enough space on the narrow road. The impact was inevitable and brutal. The world spun in slow motion for Jimmy as the car flipped over, glass shattering around them, the sound of twisting metal echoing in his ears. When the car finally came to a stop, it was upside down, and a pungent smell of gasoline began to seep into the air. "Natalie!" Jimmy shouted, his own voice sounding distant and muffled. He turned to her, his heart sinking as he saw her unconscious, with a trickle of blood running from a wound on her head. Desperate, he tried to wake her, but she didn't respond. That's when he noticed the flames starting to lick the front of the car, the fire quickly growing in intensity. "Natalie, please wake up," he pleaded, unbuckling her seatbelt and trying to drag her out of the vehicle. The fire spread, the heat and smoke making every breath a struggle. Dragging Natalie out of the car, he looked around, searching for help. They were isolated, the road empty except for the wreckage of their plans and dreams. Jimmy knew he had to act fast. With Natalie still unconscious in his arms, he began to move away from the burning wreckage, each step driven by terror and the urgency to save the life of the woman he loved. As he moved away, adrenaline coursing through his veins, he heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Help was on the way, but the uncertainty of Natalie's condition haunted him. Laying her carefully on the ground, he checked her breathing and pulse, speaking to her, trying to bring some comfort, even if she couldn't hear. "Hold on, Natalie. Please hold on," he whispered, his trembling hands caressing her face. As the sirens grew closer, Jimmy looked up at the sky, the first stars of the night appearing. He made a silent promise to protect her, no matter what. In this moment of chaos and promises, as the emergency team finally arrived, Jimmy and Natalie's lives hung by a thread. And as they were quickly attended to and taken to the nearest hospital, a new reality awaited them, ready to challenge the strength of the love and resilience they had built together. The sirens echoed in the distance as Jimmy, with Natalie still unconscious in his arms, struggled to stay calm amidst the chaos surrounding him. He had managed to drag her to a safe distance from the burning wreckage, but his heart was racing, each second seeming to stretch into an eternity. As he awaited the arrival of the paramedics, Jimmy looked back at the accident scene. It was then that he noticed movement in the car that had collided with them. The flickering light of the flames revealed a familiar figure struggling to free herself from the seatbelts. It was Ariana. Jimmy's face paled as he realized that not only was she in danger, but she also appeared to be pregnant. Without hesitation, he placed Natalie carefully on the cold grass by the roadside and ran back into the inferno of twisted metal and fire. The flames licked at Ariana's car now, and the heat was almost unbearable. "Ariana!" Jimmy shouted, approaching as close as the heat allowed. "Hold on, I'm here." Ariana, her face marked by tears and sweat, looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Jimmy, please help me," she pleaded, her voice almost drowned out by the roar of the fire. Jimmy desperately pulled at the wreckage, trying to clear a path to her. His hands trembled, and the heat was suffocating. But the thought of leaving someone behind, especially someone in such a vulnerable state, was more painful than the flames. "I'm trying, Ariana. Try to reach my hand," he yelled, stretching his arm as far as possible. With tremendous effort, Ariana managed to free herself and reach toward Jimmy. Just as their fingers were about to touch, a sudden explosion threw Jimmy back. He hit the ground, dazed and disoriented, as a cloud of smoke and sparks rose into the sky. When Jimmy finally regained his senses and crawled back to where Ariana was, his heart sank. The car was completely engulfed in flames, and there was no sign of Ariana. Tears of frustration and despair mixed with sweat on his face as he retreated, unable to do anything more. The paramedics arrived at that moment, rushing in with extinguishers and medical equipment. Jimmy was quickly taken to Natalie, who was beginning to show signs of consciousness. He held her hand, the relief of seeing her alive mingling with the sharp pain of losing Ariana. As the paramedics prepared them for transport to the hospital, Jimmy looked up at the night sky, the stars obscured by the smoke from the accident. The decision he had made in that moment of crisis haunted him, questioning if he could have saved them both if he only had more time, more luck, or simply more courage. As the ambulance drove away, taking them from the scene of the tragedy, the weight of the choices made that night rested on Jimmy. Each heartbeat a reminder of the human cost of a fateful moment. And as the road unfolded before them, a new reality set in, ready to challenge the future that had once seemed so promising. The hospital was a labyrinth of white corridors and closed doors, filled with the incessant sound of hurried footsteps and the occasional beep of medical equipment. Jimmy sat in an uncomfortable chair next to Natalie's bed, whose eyes were closed, her pale face illuminated by the faint glow of the heart monitor beside her. She was alive, but not yet entirely out of danger, as the doctors had expressed caution about the next 48 hours. As he watched the steady rhythm of Natalie's breathing, Jimmy was engulfed in a sea of guilt and remorse. The image of Ariana, trapped in the burning car, wouldn't leave his mind, and the decision he made in that critical moment haunted him incessantly. "Natalie," he whispered, holding her hand gently, "I'm so sorry for all of this." Natalie slowly opened her eyes, her gaze clouded with pain and medication. She squeezed Jimmy's hand, a weak but meaningful gesture. "Jimmy," she murmured, her voice hoarse, "there's nothing you need to apologize for. You saved my life. That's more than many could or would do." "But Ariana," Jimmy's voice broke, "I couldn't save her. I had to choose," and Natalie interrupted him, the firmness in her voice contrasting with her fragile appearance. "You made an impossible choice under extreme pressure. Don't torture yourself over it. I'm here thanks to you. And Ariana, you tried to help her too. Don't blame yourself for circumstances beyond your control." Natalie's words were a balm, but Jimmy's internal pain didn't easily dissipate. He ran his hand over his face, feeling the weight of every second of that fateful night. The silence between them was interrupted by the entrance of a doctor, who came to check Natalie's vital signs. "She's recovering well," the doctor informed them after a few minutes. "It's still early, but the signs are positive." Jimmy thanked the doctor, who left them alone once again. Turning to Natalie, Jimmy searched the depths of his soul for some way to reconcile with his actions. "Natalie, I promise you, from now on, I will do everything in my power to protect you, to be there for you," he said, the determination in his voice tinged with a new resolve. Natalie smiled, the gratitude and love evident in her tired eyes. "I know, Jimmy, and I'll be here for you too. Together, we'll get through this." As night fell outside, bringing with it the silence that only a hospital can know, Jimmy sat, watching over Nolly as she drifted back to sleep. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, and that the memories of that night would follow him for a long time. However, with Nolly by his side, he felt he could face anything. The dawn brought with it a new day, and with it, a small but significant improvement in Natalie's condition. As the days passed and Natalie continued to recover, the shadow of that tragic night still hung over Jimmy. He knew there was one more difficult step to take, a meeting he both dreaded and needed, facing Ariana's mother. Arranging to meet at a small cafe near the hospital, where the aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the soft hum of quiet conversations, Jimmy prepared himself for one of the most difficult moments of his life. Sitting alone at a corner table, he watched each customer who entered until the familiar figure of Marlene, Ariana's mother, appeared at the entrance. Her face was marked by grief, but there was a resilient dignity in her posture. Marlene approached, and Jimmy quickly stood up, his heart pounding. "Marlene, thank you for coming," he said, his voice trembling. "Jimmy," she began, her voice steady despite her visible fatigue, "I needed to come. I needed to understand what happened." Sitting down, Jimmy looked into her eyes, sincerity and remorse etched on his face. I'm so sorry, Marlene. That night when the accident happened, I did everything I could to save Natalie and Ariana, but the flames were spreading too fast, and the words were hard to find, each carrying the weight of his guilt. By the time I got back to try to save Ariana, it was too late. I will never forgive myself for not being able to save them both. Marlene listened intently, tears forming in her eyes as she absorbed every word. For a long moment, the cafe was enveloped in a heavy silence, only broken by the soft sound of a spoon touching a cup. "Jimmy," Marlene finally spoke, her voice choked with emotion. "I know my daughter. Ariana was strong, and she would have understood your actions. You made an impossible choice under unimaginable pressure." She took Jimmy's hand, squeezing it gently. "And I forgive you, Jimmy. I truly forgive you. Please, don't carry this burden alone. Ariana wouldn't want that." Marlene's words brought immense relief, though the pain of loss still lingered. "Thank you, Marlene. Your understanding means so much to me. I wish things had been different." "We all do," she replied, a sad smile on her lips. "But now, we need to find a way to live with the memories, no matter how painful they are." As they said goodbye, a bond of mutual understanding had formed between Jimmy and Marlene, an acknowledgement that despite the tragic circumstances, the human capacity for forgiveness could bring a glimpse of peace. Leaving the cafe, Jimmy felt a bit lighter, although he knew the road ahead would still be long and filled with challenges. He looked up at the sky, where the last glow of dusk gave way to the first stars, and took a deep breath, ready to continue facing the future, one step at a time. And as he walked back to the hospital to be by Natalie's side. The months that followed were a time of deep reflection and renewal for Jimmy and Natalie. The tragedy they had faced together left scars, but also paved the way for a new understanding and a deeper appreciation of the life and love they shared. Gradually, the painful memories began to transform into lessons of resilience and strength. On a quiet afternoon, as the gentle spring breeze blew through the open curtains, Jimmy and Natalie were in the nursery they had prepared together. The walls were painted a soft shade of green, and small stuffed animals were lined up on the shelf, creating a warm and loving environment. "I never thought we'd find peace so quickly after everything that happened," Natalie remarked, as she gently arranged a blanket on the dresser. Jimmy, carefully assembling the crib, looked at her with a warm smile. "I know, love, but looking at all this, at what we're building together, it gives me so much hope." It was true. Natalie's pregnancy had been a joyful and somewhat daunting surprise, given the complexity of their last few months. However, as Natalie's belly grew, so did the love and connection between them. The prospect of bringing a new life into the world seemed to seal their commitment to each other and the future they decided to face together. "What do you think it will be like?" Natalie asked, her hand resting gently on her belly. "Scary, amazing, challenging, but mostly, it will be a journey we'll take together," Jimmy replied, standing to be by her side, placing his hand over hers. "And no matter what happens, we'll teach our daughter about strength and love, about how every moment, even the hardest ones, is worth it." Natalie leaned in, resting her head on Jimmy's shoulder. "I love you, Jimmy. Thank you for standing by me, for making all this possible." "I'm the one who should be thanking you, Natalie. You've shown me what truly matters." That night, as they prepared for sleep, reflecting on the paths they had traveled together, a sense of contentment enveloped them. They knew challenges would come, but also that each challenge would be an opportunity to grow together and further strengthen the bond they had. As Natalie drifted off to sleep, Jimmy looked out the window at the stars shining brightly in the night sky. The stillness of the night seemed to mirror his own inner serenity, a serenity achieved not only through overcoming adversity, but through building a life filled with meaning and love. As the night gave way to dawn and the first rays of sunlight illuminated the room, Jimmy knew that each new day would bring its own story of challenges and triumphs. And as they awaited the arrival of their daughter, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Jimmy and Natalie walked barefoot along the soft sand of the beach near their home. The gentle sound of waves breaking on the shore provided a perfect soundtrack for the reflective thoughts accompanying the end of a significant chapter in their lives. Holding Natalie's hand tightly, Jimmy stopped and looked at the horizon, where the sun made its majestic descent. Natalie, noticing his contemplative gaze, squeezed his hand affectionately. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, following his gaze toward the horizon. "I'm thinking about everything we've been through," Jimmy replied, his eyes still fixed on the sunset. "I never imagined we'd find so much peace after everything." Natalie smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "We've grown so much, haven't we? Every challenge, every pain brought us closer to each other and made us stronger." "Yes, that's true," Jimmy agreed, turning to look into her eyes. "I used to think happiness was something you found, but I've learned it's something you build with love, patience, and a lot of resilience." Natalie nodded, the last lights of the sun reflecting on her face, giving her an almost ethereal glow. "And now, we begin a new chapter, one with our daughter, with new dreams, and, of course, new challenges. But together, I know we can face anything." Jimmy smiled, a feeling of gratitude flooding his heart. He wrapped Natalie in his arms, pulling her close. "Together," he echoed, "always together." As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a starlit sky, Jimmy and Natalie remained on the beach, embraced, the warmth of their bodies combating the cool ocean breeze. They watched the first stars appear, each shining as a testament to the infinite possibilities the future held. The comfortable silence between them spoke volumes. There was no need for words when their hearts said it all. In that moment, on that beach, under that starry sky, they were not just survivors of their past adversities, but architects of a promise of tomorrow. A tomorrow filled with love, hope, and endless new mornings to discover together. Jimmy's story ends here, but the journey he and Natalie embark on is just the beginning. As the night envelops the world in its tranquil embrace, they know that each new dawn brings with it the light of new opportunities and the chance to continue writing their story of love, challenge, and triumph, always by each other's side.
So, if you're not subscribed yet, click on the subscribe button below and join our community. Thank you for your support and see you in the next videos.